cruise ship broke free from its mooring lines this week while passengers were standing on the dock watching it happen. The bow swung away from the pier, lines snapped, the ship drifted, and that moment was the most visible result of 2 straight weeks of winter chaos that quietly wrecked Caribbean cruise itineraries, damaged private island infrastructure, and turned some sailings into cruises to nowhere. And while weather was wiping out ports, prices quietly went up, passengers were paid not to board a specific ship this weekend, and cruise lines doubled down on private destinations that cost more once you actually get there. Here's what the weather took away, and here's the shift that cruisers really need to be paying attention to. Let's start with your wallet. Carnival Cruise Line just announced that effective April 2nd, daily gratuities are increasing by $1 per person per day. Now, standard stateroom guests go from $16 to $17 per person per day, and suite guests go from $18 to $19 per person per day. Now, that part wasn't shocking. The last increase was back in April of 2023, and most cruisers, especially Carnival cruisers, expected this to happen eventually. And also to Carnival's credit, they do have some of the lowest per person gratuities in the entire cruise industry. Side note, the cruise line that has some of the highest, it might surprise you, it's Margaritaville at Sea. $22 per person per day, crazy. But what did get people talking about this price increase, which of course was done very quietly under the radar, is the changes to the soda package. Carnival's Bottomless Bubbles Unlimited Soda Package is jumping from $9.50 per day to almost $12 per day. So that's a pretty steep increase, about 26%. And that is before you tack on the extra 20% service charge, which Carnival quietly raised from 18% back in late 2025. So once you factor all of that in, you're now paying about $14.39 per adult per day for soda, juice, all the stuff that's covered in bottomless bubbles. So on a 7-night cruise with 2 adults, that's over $200 just for Coke, lemonade, that kind of stuff. Now here's the important takeaway. If you've already booked a Carnival cruise, you can prepay both gratuities and bottomless bubbles right now and lock in that lower rate, regardless of when your cruise sails, even if it's after that April implementation. So that's the move. Do it now and save some money. And again, Carnival's gratuities, they are still on the lower end of the industry. And as I mentioned, Margaritaville at Sea has surprisingly some of the highest rates, but more contemporary comparisons, Royal Caribbean is at $18.50 per person per day, Norwegian is $20 per person per day, and Virgin Voyages, which used to be all-inclusive, including gratuities, is $22 per person per day. So Carnival isn't leading the pack, but that soda increase is pretty steep, and that's the one that people are really feeling. Now let's talk about what people have lost entirely. If you've followed cruise news the last couple of weeks, or you've been on a cruise, you know that the Caribbean and the Bahamas got hit with a stretch of winter weather that just would not let up. And by the way, this episode's coming out a day late because I just got home from my own Caribbean and Bahamas cruise yesterday, so I'm a little bit behind, and I can tell you I was a victim of this winter weather as well. But I'm not complaining because it's still better than what I have outside here in the Midwest. But in case you missed it, a powerful bomb cyclone slammed the East Coast at the end of January, and the ripple effects of that lasted well into February. Gale force winds across the Bahamas, high seas, temperatures that had no business being in the Caribbean, and cruise lines spent days rewriting itineraries on the fly. Royal Caribbean's Oasis of the Seas and Utopia both lost stops at Perfect Day at Coco Cay. Wonder of the Seas and Celebrity Reflection turned into cruises to nowhere after losing every port call. Disney Wish skipped Castaway Cay, spent an extra day in Nassau, all kinds of disruptions. And for me personally, I was on Carnival Mardi Gras for my annual birthday cruise. And unfortunately, the one port of call I was most excited about, because I haven't been there in almost 2 years, is Grand Turk, and it was canceled due to the bad weather. We did thankfully make it to our other ports of call. Puerto Plata was great, pretty warm. The Bahamas were pretty cold. Nassau was okay, about low 70s, but we did spend our last day, which was Friday, just a few days ago, and it was about 60 degrees. And at Celebration Key, there's not much to do there aside from the pool and the ocean. And it was just way too cold, so those were a no-go. But I'm just grateful to have been on a cruise, even if the weather was not ideal. But the problems didn't end when the weather cleared. At Perfect Day at Coco Cay, heavy seas broke aluminum catwalks on the eastern side of the pier. Now, these are those walkways that dock workers use to move between mooring platforms, and they broke free and they unfortunately fell into the water. Divers couldn't locate all of them, and because of that, Royal Caribbean couldn't safely dock ships on that side of the pier. So pier capacity basically dropped from 2 ships to 1. That means that Freedom of the Seas was diverted to Cabo Rojo, Celebrity Reflection went to Freeport, and by February 5th, Adventure of the Seas and Liberty of the Seas were able to dock again, and Royal Caribbean had confirmed that operations had resumed. But then on February 6th, Icon, Explorer, they skipped Coco Cay again, but not because of the the pier this time, but because the weather just was still not done doing its damage. So crazy couple of weeks. Hopefully things are going to be calmer now. And of course, when you're cruising, you can never predict the weather. And speaking of more weather damage, MSC Seaside, which I'll be on in April, was docked at Ocean Key Marine Reserve, one of my favorite cruise line private islands, with passengers still on shore waiting to reboard. So a sudden burst of wind happened and it snapped the ship's forward mooring lines. So note, when cruise lines cancel ports of call because of bad weather, I know a lot of cruisers don't like that. I heard lots of grousing from my fellow Mardi Gras passengers because our call to Grand Turk got canceled. But this, friends, is precisely why cruise lines and captains make these calls. It's for our own safety. And what happened at Ocean Key with MSC Seaside is the bow broke free and swung away from the pier while the aft lines thankfully held. So video made the rounds on social media. It shows the ship drifting at the front with broken lines hanging from the bow as passengers watched in shock from the dock. MSC did confirm the incident, saying that the ship departed from the pier due to inclement weather, which did temporarily pause embarkation. They had to engage the thrusters, but they were able to bring the ship back alongside. Thankfully, with no injuries and no damage, and remarkably, departure actually stayed on schedule. So yeah, it stinks when ports of call get canceled. It stinks when we have bad weather on a cruise, but the most important thing is everyone stay safe. And this brings me to a question I hear a lot, obviously over the last 2 weeks, as all of this craziness with the weather has been happening. And when I missed Grand Turk, I posted on social media and a lot of people asked me of, well, what kind of compensation can we expect? I'm like, well, nothing. Our contracts of carriage we sign as passengers basically say that we aren't entitled or obligated to go to any port of call. And especially if a call is canceled due to something out of passenger safety concern or weather, those port cancellations are not refundable. Now, we do get port fees and taxes back, that kind of thing. But of course, the cruise line's obligation is safety, not delivering the itinerary that you booked. So basically, it's too bad, so sad, deal with it. But this is exactly why you need travel insurance. And I have my travel insurance guide for cruisers right down below. I can send you an instant quote. I think an annual plan is a fantastic move. That's what I do. And I don't care where you get travel insurance, just make sure you get it. Now, if that makes cruising sound like pure madness and chaos, here's a story that surprised a lot of people. Guests booked on Royal Caribbean's Oasis of the Seas sailing this Saturday received an email most cruisers never see. We hear it with airlines all the time, but not so much with cruise lines. Royal Caribbean was hitting up volunteers, hopefully finding people who were willing to give up their spot on the sailing in exchange for a full refund, including non-refundable deposits, reimbursement for pre-purchase flights and hotels, and even a 50% future cruise credit based on the cost of the original fare. Now, that credit can be used on any Royal Caribbean sailing all the way through February of 2027. Now, Royal Caribbean has not officially confirmed that the sailing is oversold, but let's be real, that's obviously what happened here. Overbookings happen more often than people realize. Liberty of the Seas and Navigator of the Seas had oversold sailings in May of 2025. Adventure had the same issue back in June, so it definitely happens. And in this case, this is actually a pretty generous offer. When Quantum of the Seas was oversold back in late 2023, denied guests received only a refund and a 25% future cruise credit, which I think is pretty paltry. So if your flexible is scheduled, this kind of email can actually be an opportunity for you. Now, if it's not, obviously you decline and board as planned because there's always going to be somebody out there who's willing to take the deal. But the bigger takeaway here is demand, because you know what, friends? Ships are full, sometimes fuller than planned. And now let's talk about what that demand is telling us and where it is showing up. And mostly it's in deployment decisions. Carnival just announced it will homeport 2 ships in Baltimore starting fall 2027. Carnival Miracle will join Carnival Pride, which has sailed year-round from Baltimore for over 20 years. Miracle arrives on November 20th, 2027 after a transatlantic crossing from Rome and will offer 7, 8, and 9-day Bahamas and Eastern Caribbean cruises, plus 12 and 14-day Carnival Journeys itineraries. Royal Caribbean is pulling ships out of Baltimore, but Carnival is stepping right in to fill that gap, and they're committing to that port all the way through 2030. So if you drive to your cruise port or live anywhere in the mid-Atlantic, that's a pretty meaningful upgrade. Now, over on the West Coast, we've also seen some exciting deployments. Holland America Line is a cruise line a lot of cruisers kind of sleep on. I love it. Yes, it's an older people cruise line, but I think it's a whole lot of fun. They've announced 4 ships operating roughly 35 voyages between October 2027 and April 2028. The standout, though, is a 17 and 18-day Circle Hawaii sailing with overnight calls in Honolulu lasting up to 40 hours. That's some real time in port. That's pretty cool and kind of rare. They're also offering Mexican Riviera, Panama Canal, which I actually did a month ago on Holland America Line, video coming soon on that. It was amazing. And Pacific Coast itineraries. These are already open for advanced booking. Now, Holland America, they're not chasing the mega ship flash. They're not into thrills at sea, adrenaline, water parks, roller coasters, all the razzle dazzle. They instead lean into longer port-focused itineraries, and I find them to be a more educational cruise line. And as a nerd, I love that, which is why I like Holland. And for Hawaii cruises, that overnight stay, that's, I think, a pretty good differentiator. And finally, let's talk about the shift cruise lines are betting big on. USA Today recently published a deep dive on private cruise destinations and the growing layer of fees that are tied to them. At Royal Caribbean's Royal Beach Club Paradise Island in Nassau, day passes with unlimited food and open bar are listed at just under $200 per person. One couple that they featured in the article spent $930. Eyeball on a budget. That's kind of like astronomical to me. But also I spend a lot of money in the casino like an idiot, so people would judge that. So I guess no judgment here. But anyway, this couple, they spent almost $1,000 on a bundle that included beach club passes, deluxe beverage package, and hideaway beach access on a 4-day cruise. Carnival Celebration Key, which I was just at a few days ago, where it was very cold, includes a paid adults only Pearl Cove Beach Club. And by the way, that did come in clutch for people who bought that because at 60, 61 degrees when we were there on Friday, they do have a heated pool at Pearl Cove where the other pools and lagoons are not heated. So folks who had Pearl Cove passes definitely got their money's worth. When it comes to Norwegian, they just confirmed that starting on March 1st, onboard drink packages will no longer work at Great Stirrup Key. An analyst quoted in the article said profit margins on premium private island experiences exceed 70 to 80%. So as someone who loves business and economics, that's fascinating to me. And I've been a pretty vocal critic of cruise lines kind of milking cruisers with these commercialized private destinations. Now, that's not to say they're not a good experience. I love many cruise line private islands and private destinations, some more than others, but it is definitely a money grab, and the numbers bear that out. A survey of over 4,500 adults found that 55% consider private island stops when booking, and nearly 1 in 4 say that they would switch cruise brands for a better private destination. So cruise lines, they're betting big. They're betting passengers will pay for these tiered land experiences the same way they may pay for a suite or an upgrade or a balcony or something on board. And the data say they're right. Now, this doesn't mean cruising is unaffordable, but that gap between what's included and what traditionally has been perceived as an all-inclusive vacation and what costs extra and extra and extra and extra starts to widen really fast, especially at destinations that cruise lines fully control, and especially at destinations that are literally private islands where you are a captive audience and you can't even go anywhere. And now let's talk about one final development that many cruisers have been following closely. On Friday, the 16-year-old stepbrother of Anna Kepner appeared before a federal magistrate in Miami. Now, I'm sure you know this story. It has been absolutely the talk of cruise world over the last several months. Anna Kepner was the 18-year-old Florida high school young woman who died aboard Carnival Horizon in November. Her death was ruled a homicide, and court proceedings remain sealed, and no charges still have been publicly released. Now, of course, speculation, suspicion abounds, but with this hearing, we're starting to see some developments. After this hearing, the teen, her stepbrother, was processed for pretrial release. Now, of course, out of respect for the family, I'm not going to speculate, but this is a development, this is movement in the case that is pushing it along into the federal court system, and that alone signals that it is progressing. I do suspect that we will not hear much about this because the stepbrother in question is a minor still, but it is encouraging to see that hopefully the wheels of justice are turning and they will prevail.